Good morning, everyone. And on behalf of InterTrade Ireland, thank you for joining this webinar on managing Brexit together. I'm Jane Watson from Morrow Communications Events team, and we're looking after the housekeeping and technical production for today's session. We have over 500 registered for today, and I can see that most of those are already online. So thank you very much for joining us this morning or this afternoon. I'm sure many of you are already familiar with the Zoom webinar platform. However, I'll just run through some features which we'll be using today. Viewers cannot turn their camera or microphone on in today's session, but there will be plenty of interaction using the Q&A button during the panel session, as well as some live polls. I hope that everyone is seeing and hearing me clearly. If you do have a technical issue, please use the chat button to send us a message and we'll try to assist you remotely. As you can see, the agenda for today is online on the screen as we speak. We do aim to keep the programme running to time and expect to finish no later than 1:30 p.m. Today's session is being recorded and the video will soon be available on the InterTrade Ireland's website just in the coming days. We would ask to please refrain from recording it yourselves. We are delighted that Minister Simon Coveney TD will join live from his office in Dublin to provide a keynote address. He will then take some pertinent questions from Aidan Goff, who is InterTrade Ireland's designate officer. But first, I'm going to hand over to the recorded message from Ken Nelson, the chairman of InterTrade Ireland, who unfortunately couldn't be here in person today and sends his apologies. Ken will then hand directly over to Minister Simon Coveney. So thank you very much and enjoy today's session. Thank you.
Good afternoon. You're all very welcome to what promises to be an interesting and insightful event. It's an understatement to say that 2020 has been a very difficult year for many firms, regardless of their size. COVID-19 had forced many of us to pause and think about our business in a different way. It's times like these that really underline the importance of innovation, robust supply chains, and consumer confidence. InterTrade Ireland is keenly aware of the pressures and challenges that many of you face, and is here to help businesses that trade across the border. We're here to help you navigate change, embrace innovation, and explore new opportunities. That's why today's event has been organised. The end of the transition period is another inflection point that will understandably be in the minds of many of you right now. The purpose of this webinar is to highlight some actions that you can begin to take now to help you prepare for the 1st of January 2021. You'll also hear from InterTrade Ireland's Brexit Advisory Service, which is a powerful resource for business. This dedicated team will outline all the supports on offer, including 100% funded support towards professional advice to help you understand the impact of the new trading relationship on your SME. We can't say it often enough. InterTrade Ireland can help make the Brexit transition more manageable for your business. It is also my pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker. The Irish Minister for Foreign Affairs has taken time out of an extremely busy diary to speak with us today. I think that underlines the importance of cross-border trade on this island. I will now hand over to Mr. Simon Coveney, TD.
Thank you very much, Ken, and I hope everybody can hear me. I've just unmuted, so if people can't hear me, please somebody put their hand up or interrupt, and I'll check our system and make sure it's working. Can I just say it's a real privilege and a pleasure for me to have the opportunity to contribute to the discussion this morning, and I want to thank InterTrade Ireland in particular for the work that they've been doing over many, many months, trying to ensure that businesses on both sides of the border get access to information when it's available, and of course has the capacity to be able to provide grants to businesses to help them get ready for the new realities that will flow from Brexit, and of course to provide advice as well on many of the issues that companies unfortunately are still having to ask questions on, because we don't have political clarity on a number of things. Even with only, I think it's 58 days left to go to the end of the transition period between now and the end of the year, there's still a lot of uncertainty in terms of what deal will be done, if there'll be a deal done, and how that deal will impact on various businesses and of course cross-border trade on the island. So if it's helpful, maybe I'll deal with three separate issues and give you my perspective on where we are on them, and then obviously I'm very anxious to take your questions. So I'll deal with the future relationship negotiations, which essentially has the capacity, if it's concluded successfully, to agree a basic trade agreement and a whole series of other agreements as part of that, to ensure that we move from the end of transition, which is the end of this year, which is sort of a sheltered period post-Brexit, where everything stays the same from a rules and regulation perspective, into a new reality from the 1st of January that I hope can limit the disruption that would otherwise take place if there wasn't a future relationship and a trade agreement in place. Secondly, I just want to speak briefly around the implementation of the protocol on Ireland and Northern Ireland, because that I think is really important in terms of protecting the all-island economy and cross-border trade. Effectively, what that protocol does is it creates in Northern Ireland a de facto extension of the EU single market for goods. And by doing that, removes the need for any border infrastructure or checks of any kind between North and South, between the two jurisdictions. Even though Northern Ireland is outside of the European Union, it will still effectively be mirroring the rules and standards of the EU single market as they apply to goods, and not necessarily services, but certainly goods. And then thirdly, I just want to address our state of readiness, if you like, for those new realities, and what businesses themselves need to be doing, what they need to be thinking about, planning for, investing in, so that from the 1st of January on, you have taken the steps that are possible to take to protect your businesses as best you can from the disruption that will flow from the 1st of January, particularly on goods that are being sold off the island into GB or indeed to other parts of the world. So look, first of all, in relation to the future relationship negotiations, obviously that's led by Michel Barnier and his team on the EU side, Lord David Frost and his team on the British side. And, I think it would be fair to say that there is intensive negotiations underway right now, as there should be. And I think the proof of that really is that there has been very, very little media briefing or information leaking out from those negotiating rooms, whether they be in London or Brussels. That's a good sign that there's a serious negotiation underway in an attempt to try to hammer out agreement in the areas that are still outstanding and haven't been able to be agreed to date. Those areas, I think, are no secret. The EU will continue to insist on having an agreement on what they call a level playing field. It won't be called that, I suspect, in any final agreement, because that term is a difficult one politically in Westminster. But there does need to be clarity around commitments on both sides to fair competition, effectively. And there needs to be a governance structure agreed to ensure that if that commitment to fair competition is undermined by the actions of either side after the agreement, that there is a dispute resolution mechanism that can deal with that robustly and quickly and fairly. And that governance structure has to be obviously acceptable to both sides. So I think there is a difficult but necessary discussion and negotiation around what that looks like in terms of the level of clear commitment from both sides to fair competition in areas like state aid, standards, consumer protection, environmental protections, and many other areas. And if you look at the political declaration that was agreed little under a year ago, there was a very clear commitment by both sides to a level playing field and fair competition and what that meant. And while I think the language will change for understandable political reasons, the concept of fair competition between two big economies right next door to each other, looking to trade with each other in the absence of tariffs and quotas, with a whole series of other linked agreements as part of that overall agreement around data, around aviation, around road haulage, and all of those other things that will allow, hopefully, the two economies to be able to successfully trade in as seamless a way as is possible with the UK outside of the EU. That's what we're trying to achieve here. But if there's not a basic set of rules around fair competition that both sides commit to complying with, and if there's not a governance structure that can deal with disputes, well, then in my view, there will not be a trade deal. And so my understanding is that there is some progress being made in this area, but it's far from concluded yet. The second area, which is a specific area, but is very political, is fishing. And both sides have made very significant commitments to their own fishing interests in terms of the negotiating mandates that both negotiating teams have. And on the basis of those mandates, they are miles apart. The EU is here, the UK is here. And so how we find a way through the negotiating teams of closing those gaps and getting an agreed approach to fishing and access issues into British waters, while of course respecting British sovereignty, and quota share issues within British waters is something that is very political. If you look at the amount of money that's involved in comparison to the overall trading relationship between the EU and the UK, it's a very small percentage of that. But the politics of this and the emotive nature of fishing and its link to perceptions around sovereignty and control and management of resources is something that makes fishing a very, very difficult issue to resolve, which is why the EU and the UK agreed that fishing had to be resolved in the context of an overall agreement where there would be a bit of give and take on multiple issues. And the UK, I think, needs facilitation from the EU in many areas in terms of protecting a positive relationship into the future. And I think the EU needs some facilitation also from the UK on fishing in terms of access rights, so that we can together manage stocks in a way that's sustainable and in a way that protects all of our fishing industries and coastal communities. So I mean, I can go into, if you want me to, into individual stocks that are more sensitive and the numbers around that, but I think that's probably too much detail for this initial presentation. So fair competition and fishing are two big issues, but they're not the only issues. There are also issues around access, for example, to the EU's energy markets, and some of the issues that I mentioned earlier around data protection, judicial cooperation, aviation, haulage, recognition of standards and certification, movement of people, EU nationals in the UK and UK nationals across the EU, a whole range of things. There are in fact 11 different negotiating streams that are all being negotiated in parallel with each other. And what we're trying to do is to get a future relationship agreement that can have a whole package of things agreed together. But I think this does hinge on whether or not we get a trade deal. Because if we get a trade deal that both sides can live with and accept on the basis of fair competition, well then I think that then creates both the atmosphere and the political space to have agreements in all these other areas as well. If we don't get a trade deal in place, which effectively means from in 58 days' time, the trade between the UK and the EU will be operating under World Trade Organization rules, which will involve tariffs and potentially quotas in certain products, then I think the politics and the atmosphere will be much more problematic to put in place contingency plans, probably on a short-term basis, for many of these areas that can allow basic movement of goods and services and people. So I think that, ironically, this isn't just about a trade agreement. It's also about the politics of getting a trade agreement, which creates an opportunity to resolve a whole load of other things as well that are linked to trade, but are not solely trade related, which I think are really important for people's quality of life and for the political cooperation and partnership between the EU and the UK in the future. So, you know, I believe we will get a deal. I believe the negotiating teams will find a way of doing that, but it's not easy. And it could also happen that a deal just becomes too difficult to strike in the timelines that we have. And of course, that creates a whole series of new problems for both sides, but in particular for the UK and for Ireland, and for the island of Ireland as a whole, north and south. The absence of a trade deal and the absence of agreement in many of these other areas, I think, creates an awful lot of tension and difficulty in the context of trade between Britain and Ireland, but also some questions in terms of the implementation of the protocol on Northern Ireland and Ireland. Now, that brings me to the second issue, which is progress on implementation of what's already been agreed in the withdrawal agreement, and as part of that withdrawal agreement, which is now, of course, international law, the protocol on Northern Ireland and Ireland. And what's being discussed at the moment in the Joint Committee and the Specialised Committee is not effectively a renegotiation of that, which some people are looking for, it seems, but how we implement what's already been agreed and what is protected in international law and what is a legal obligation on both sides to facilitate and now implement. That being said, there are areas that need negotiated solutions in terms of implementation with the protocol. And that is essentially what's underway now. So, you know, the implementation of checking systems in ports and airports in Northern Ireland, which we all know are necessary and were agreed to, but what do they look like? How do they work? How can we make this as streamlined a process as possible to facilitate trade east-west as well as north-south, which, you know, is very much in our interests, you know, as well as in the interests of others. And this perception that sometimes is out there that somehow the Irish government wants to see a border down the Irish Sea or any barriers or impediment to trade east-west or west-east between Northern Ireland and GB just isn't true. What we have signed up to is the bare minimum. That means we never have to face the prospect of border infrastructure on the island, north and south, to protect the Republic of Ireland's place in the EU single market and an all-island economy, while at the same time doing the minimum necessary checks to ensure that the integrity of the single market is protected and we don't have essentially an unguarded backdoor through Northern Ireland into the EU single market from GB. So that's the theory, but in practice, implementing that is challenging. The British government have some very genuine concerns here that they're looking for accommodation on, and the EU also has genuine concerns in terms of protecting the integrity of the single market, which they expect that the agreement will be fully implemented on. So some of those areas, which some of you will be familiar with in terms of things that are problematic, linked to the implementation of the protocol, supermarket chains, for example. How can we try to accommodate the complexity of the supply chains in large supermarkets that may have tens of thousands of products that are being transported from GB into Northern Ireland on a daily basis in the context of the requirement for SBS checks, and of course in the context of the potential future application of tariffs as well in relation to some products. very difficult and tricky area, but I think a very genuine one on the British side that I think both sides need to try to work on. There are issues also around country of origin issues, which I understand people may have questions on later. It is my view that if the EU can do it, we should be trying to accommodate companies in Northern Ireland, manufacturers in Northern Ireland producing goods. We should try to ensure, if we can, that those goods can benefit from EU free trade agreements that are already in place. I mean, if we're asking Northern Ireland to comply with or mirror the rules of the EU single market for goods in terms of standards, then I think we should be offering them the benefits of free trade agreements that are linked to the EU single market for goods. It's a lot easier said than done, though, because what this effectively means is legally changing every free trade agreement, all 60 or so of them, to accommodate a change in wording that would allow Northern Ireland outside of the EU to benefit from EU trade agreements. And that is not as straightforward as it might seem. But certainly it's something that I and the Irish government have been consistently raising with the EU side and indeed the UK side as well, because I think it makes sense from an all-island economy point of view, because a lot of the supply chains are linked north and south. If you take milk, for example, a country like Lakeland Dairy, I think they source about 43% of their milk pool from the north. It's just one of many examples of integrated supply chains where there is an all-island economy functioning together in a very interwoven way that then collectively benefits from EU trade agreements to other parts of the world in terms of exporting opportunities and so on. But there's a whole range of other issues as well. You'll know the very public ones, I'm sure, on concerns around the requirement for export declarations for companies selling out of Northern Ireland into GB. And I think there is an ongoing discussion in terms of how to accommodate what are concerns in that area and finding a way of getting agreement that both sides can live with. There are some concerns in relation to state aid and also what's called a goods at risk issue in terms of the application of tariffs in the absence of a trade agreement. In other words, if goods are coming from GB into Northern Ireland, how do we know what goods are at risk of potentially leaking south across the border into the EU single market? Because if they end up in the EU single market, they have to have tariffs applied, and that tariff has to be paid in a port in Northern Ireland, because there is no and will be no border infrastructure to calculate or collect that tariff between north and south on the island. That's a very tricky issue. And the state aid issue, while there's no problem, I think, in terms of recognizing that Northern Ireland needs to mirror the EU state aid rules to ensure fair competition in the all-island economy, what happens when you have a parent company or a company that has a footprint in GB and in Northern Ireland? And if the British government decides to put significant state aid supports into the parent company or the company's footprint in GB, does that derive a competitive advantage by extension into Northern Ireland that would distort fair competition on an all-island economy? These are very genuine questions whereby there has been a difference of opinion and perspective in terms of how to solve them, and we're working through them. Having said that, the goods at risk issue, as it pertains to tariffs, and the state aid issue as it relates to state aid in GB, both of those issues become non-issues if there's a trade agreement, because under the fair competition discussions, the state aid issue will have been resolved. And of course, if there's a trade agreement, there's going to be no tariffs anyway. So the goods at risk issue doesn't arise. So that's where I think the implementation of the protocol and the complexity of that for businesses in Northern Ireland and indeed south of the border that are impacted by that, and the negotiations around trying to get a trade deal are very much interconnected. If we get a trade deal, the protocol becomes a lot more straightforward to implement. Not entirely straightforward, but certainly a lot easier than it otherwise would be in some of these areas. So there are two committees that essentially are looking at the implementation of the protocol. There's the Joint Committee, responsible for implementing what's already been agreed this time last year in the withdrawal agreement, and then in the withdrawal agreement as a whole. And then there is the specialised committee on the Northern Ireland and Irish Protocol. That specialised committee is going to meet this week on the 5th, on Thursday, again to try to iron out some of these outstanding issues that still haven't been resolved. Can I just say though, I think the atmosphere in both the specialised committee and the joint committee has improved significantly. The relationships are good. And I think both sides are trying to approach this now with a sort of a can-do attitude to try to resolve the outstanding issues in a way that, for the most part, recognises the difficulties of the other side, if you like. And that's the only way you close out negotiations in the end. You know, there's got to be some pragmatism and compromise. But I think the challenge here is, how do we introduce that pragmatism and compromise while at the same time respecting the legal obligations in full of the withdrawal agreement and the protocol on Northern Ireland, and that I think is the big challenge. You know, there's also an issue around an EU presence, for example, in Northern Ireland, in terms of providing the feedback and communications around how the protocol is being implemented in the future and how the EU's interests are being protected. The final thing I'd say, because I know I am a bit over time, but hopefully this is helpful commentary to you. Is around readiness. So, you know, there are some people who still naively think that if we get a trade deal, that actually everything more or less stays the same. You know, trade deal or no trade deal, comprehensive future relationship agreement or not, if we manage to get that done in the next 2 weeks, because that's the timeline we're on now. We are really running out of time at this stage. Whether we get that best case scenario or whether that negotiation fails and it's a worst case scenario of no trade deal, either way, on the 1st of January, there is fundamental change. Less so on the island of Ireland, actually, in terms of cross-border trade, because I think we have an international agreement in the withdrawal agreement and the implementation of the protocol that protects an all-island economy in a pretty fundamental way, prevents border infrastructure and all of the disruption that would come from that. And effectively, as I said at the start, creates in Northern Ireland what is, for all intents and purposes, a de facto extension of the EU single market for goods, which, by the way, is a fantastic opportunity for businesses in Northern Ireland. They effectively leave the European Union, but they can still trade in a completely unfettered way into the EU single market of 450 million people. So holding on to the economic benefits of EU membership while outside of the EU in terms of trading goods anyway. So that is and that upside rarely gets focused on actually in terms of media commentary, and the opportunities that flow for Northern Ireland on that, because Northern Ireland also will have, under the protocol, facilitated unfettered access into GB, into the rest of the United Kingdom. And the opportunities of the combined advantages of both of those things, I think, are a real opportunity for the island as a whole, but for Northern Ireland in particular. And that is more than deserved, given the stresses and strains of the Brexit negotiations on Northern Ireland and on this island as a whole. So, you know, in terms of practical blunt messaging, what I would say to people is, if you trade to, through, or from GB, from this island, you do need to be thinking about those supply chains. What will they look like? How will they function from the 1st of January on? Will there be tariffs applied if there's no trade deal? If so, what does that mean in terms of cost competitiveness? Will your supply chains be certified for the EU single market? Are you sourcing from companies that will have EU certification? If not, you need to perhaps look at other supply routes. What delays are you going to see in ports and airports, in goods coming to and from the island as a whole? Not just from GB, but from other parts of the single market, if they're using the UK as a land bridge to get to and from this island, which is the case for the vast majority of products coming from other parts of the single market. Do you have Do you understand how systems around VAT are going to work? Do you understand how a customs declaration works? Are you registered in terms of a customs number? Do you have a customs agent? Do you need a customs agent? Can you do it internally within your business? East-west trade and north-south trade, I think, needs to be very well understood. And businesses really do need to ensure that there's at least one person, if not a team of people in their business, depending on the size of their business, that really understands this stuff, so that you're not taken by surprise by something in 58 days' time that you haven't thought through. And, you know, the state is there to help you get ready. And we have lots and lots of grant supports that are available through various different arms of the state. InterTradeIreland are doing great work in terms of giving leadership on that on a cross-border basis. But there is no shortage of information and support. And I think what I would say to companies is, get ready now. This is happening whether you like it or not. There is no more extra time, no more transition period. In 58 days' time, deal or no deal on trade, these new realities are going to take effect, and our businesses need to get ready for that. I think there's a lot of preparation that has been put in place, and many businesses are ready. And the outstanding questions that are still there, linked to whether we get a trade deal or not, and how the protocol is implemented between now and the 1st of January, are issues that I hope we as a government, and indeed the British government and the executive in Northern Ireland, will be able to provide you with information on as soon as possible. You know, the timelines around concluding a deal on a future relationship really revolve around the next 2 weeks, not really anything beyond that. So this is a really crucial time, this week and next week, to try and finalize those arrangements. And if it's not possible to do that, to focus in a very intense way on the contingency plans for a no trade deal Brexit, which I hope we won't have to do, and I think we won't have to do, but we would be very naive and foolish not to be preparing for that eventuality just in case. So that's hopefully a thought-provoking contribution, but I'm happy to take any questions that people might have.
Thank you, Minister Seaton here from InterTradeIreland, for what, as usual, was a very comprehensive, insightful and indeed open overview of where we are at in terms of the negotiations. We're absolutely delighted that you could take the time to launch our Brexit information webinar series for cross-border traders. Brexit, as you well know better than anyone, is an incredibly complex issue. Cross-border trade is dominated. Over 20,000 very small businesses depend on their livelihood from cross-border trade. So I want to ask you just a few fairly straightforward questions that are frequently asked of us. And I do so in the full knowledge that the simplest questions are often the most difficult to answer. But one that's put to us often, you know, Brexit could not be coming in a worse time. So many businesses are now struggling with falling demand or no demand at all, very precarious cash flow balances. Do you envisage any flexibility in the early part of the new year when the transition period, as you said yourself, is only 58 days to run? Do you envisage any flexibility in the early part of the new year to give firms a reasonable time to adjust?
Yeah. Well, I mean, what I will say is that, you know, the EU side have, for many months now, insisted on the legal obligations of effectively a post-transition period being very clear. And what I mean by that is that once the transition period ends, legally there is no framework for further flexibility or further, you know, sort of extension of special arrangements or whatever, unless, of course, there's an agreement on that in the context of the future relationship. So the EU is certainly preparing for, from a contingency perspective, on the 1st of January, operating to World Trade Organization rules and standards in the absence of a trade deal. The UK has taken a slightly different approach in terms of goods coming into the UK from the EU, saying that, you know, that there will be a 6-month period of adjustment required and so on in British ports on goods coming in, just recognizing the practicalities of the infrastructure that's needed and so on. But I think the EU has been warning on this for many, many months, and I think they're going to be quite insistent on abiding by international law, if you like, around trade, or international rules around trade in the absence of an agreement. That being said, I think if we do get an agreement, and I believe we will, I mean, call me naively optimistic, but I do believe we will, mainly because I think the consequences of not getting a deal are so dire for everybody. And that on top of the challenges of COVID, which really has been so disruptive and so difficult for so many businesses, you know, would I think be really a monumental failure of politics, quite frankly, if we can't find a way of getting an agreement. But if we get an agreement, and if we get an agreed implementation of the protocol, there may be some areas that require some flexibility around sort of settling in or bedding in periods after the 1st of January. And I think in the space of an agreement, there will be a political atmosphere that will be more forgiving, if you like, in terms of understanding the need for that type of flexibility. In the absence of a trade agreement, I think it'll be much more rigid. But there are certain things in terms of the implementation of the protocol that now are almost undeliverable from a time scale perspective. So, you know, delivering on the infrastructure that's needed in ports in Northern Ireland in 58 days, because physically they haven't changed, even though there's a plan in place to do that. So therefore, I suspect there will be some of that infrastructure will be temporary infrastructure from the 1st of January on, but still in place to do a certain job. So I think there'll be some flexibility shown, but I wouldn't like to overemphasize that. And I wouldn't like to suggest to businesses that are trying to get ready for the 1st of January that they should somehow ease off on that there'll be a sort of a grey period when people will be given time and space to adjust when they see the new realities for real. I think that would be that would be wrong advice for me to be giving to people right now. You know, I think people need to be planning to be ready, and indeed, in some cases, have tested contingency plans by the 1st of January. What I mean by that is that I think if you're selling goods into France or into Belgium or into Spain or Portugal or whatever, and you're relying on the UK land bridge to get goods there through the Dover-Calais link, for example, well, maybe you should be looking at contingency plans in terms of direct ferry routes through this month.
And for businesses that
see if it works.
And for businesses that are trading just across the border, the NI protocol does guarantee the free movement of goods across the border. But can small cross-border traders assume that nothing will change?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important to say that, you know, people say this to me all the time. Look, you know, if we don't get a deal on trade, does this mean that that the border question reemerges all over again? Like, it doesn't. And I want to be really clear on this. Like, we have resolved this issue. It was resolved this time last year. It is now protected in international law. It's called the Withdrawal Agreement on the Protocol on Northern Ireland and Ireland. We're currently figuring out how to implement that in a way that both sides can live with. But I don't think we're in the space of a no trade deal does not mean no deal on the implementation of the protocol. So the protocol is being implemented regardless of what happens on a trade deal, regardless of what happens on a future relationship agreement, and will ensure that an all-island economy can function in terms of goods being able to move around the island without any tariffs or interruption or checking systems or anything else around standards checks and so on. That's what the protocol does. So if you're selling products from Newry down to Dublin, or if you're selling, from Cavan into Belfast or whatever, you're going to be able to continue to sell those products. There are some issues around services and recognition of qualifications and standards that we're obviously trying to work on as well, to make sure that happens in as seamless a way as possible. But by and large, the all-island economy as it functions today, without any border interruption or disruption, should continue, trade deal or no trade deal. Where, of course, the disruption becomes more complicated is across the Irish Sea, in the absence of a trade deal, because then we have the really complex issue of the application of tariffs and trying to distinguish between goods that we know are coming from GB into Northern Ireland and staying in Northern Ireland, and goods that are coming from GB into Northern Ireland but may find their way into the EU single market and therefore must have tariffs applied. And of course, goods going the other way, from Northern Ireland into GB that shouldn't have tariffs applied. And if you take products like beef, for example, if you have an animal that's born in the Republic of Ireland and then is purchased as a store animal in a mart in Galway that gets taken north of the border to be finished and slaughtered, is that British product or Irish product in the context of tariffs being sold, and being sold into GB? These are issues that become much more complex in the absence of a trade deal. We know 500,000 lambs, for example, come south from Northern Ireland to be slaughtered.
And that is the issue.
What I would say to businesses on the border. Sorry,
no, go ahead, Minister. We're just getting a word that's running out.
Yeah. Just to give some reassurance to businesses that are either side of the border, that are trading goods and products north or south. That trade will largely not be disrupted on the 1st of January. But it's the goods that are then being exported off the island, whether it's into GB or indeed other parts of the world, linked to EU trade agreements. That's where the disruption may well become an issue in terms of supply chains and so on. And they are some of the issues that we're trying to resolve through sensible and pragmatic negotiation in terms of the implementation of the protocol. And people will raise this issue around country of origin rules. So goods produced in Northern Ireland are UK origin goods, even though they're being produced to the standard of the EU single market for goods. But if their country of origin is UK, then they can't be sold on the basis of an EU trade agreement under certain circumstances. And they are the kind of anomalies, if you like, that we are trying to find solutions for as best we can to help companies.
It's absolutely critical that every business now examines its supply chains and its route to markets and becomes aware of any exposures it may have. But Minister, we've run out of time here. Can I just thank you again for giving up the time to speak to us? And on behalf of everyone who's part of this seminar, we want to wish you and your government well in dealing with what are now 2 generational challenges in the space of just a few months, Brexit and COVID. So thank you very much again, Minister Cole. Look, back to our host.
Yeah, thank you to everybody. And just, once again, if we can be helpful on anything, businesses that are on this call, please feel free to reach out to my office or my department, or indeed through InterTradeIreland, and we'll try to get you technical answers to technical questions if that's what you have, or to try to give you as accurate a steer as we can politically in terms of where all this is going. But just to say to you, the next 2 weeks really is when this process around the future relationship will come to a head. So hopefully some of the outstanding questions that we can't answer today will have answers and more clarity in the next 2 to 3 weeks, which will allow you to finalize the preparations that you may be trying to design for your companies. But look, this is a really tough time for businesses. The combination of COVID and the Brexit uncertainty has put enormous pressure and stress on business owners, particularly small family businesses that don't have a HR department, or in some cases a Brexit department, like some big companies and multinationals have. And that's why our agencies and agencies like InterTradeIreland are there to try to give guidance and support and help to smaller businesses in particular. So we'll do what we can politically to try to get a deal in place that everybody can work with and live with, and then hopefully manage the transition at the end of this year into the new realities of next year in a way that keeps as many people in business as we can.
Thank you, Minister.
Thank you.
And I hand you back to Jean, our host.
Thank you, Aidan. Thank you, Minister Coveney. And I'd like to just carry on with the rest of the programme. Glad to see the sun was shining in Dublin for you, Minister. I'm delighted now to welcome our next speaker, who is Professor Katy Hayward from Queen's University Belfast. Katy has presented widely on the topic of Brexit and Northern Ireland and Ireland. Just to note, we see lots of you have been using the Q&A feature already this morning. So as you hear Katy's talk and Vincent's, which will follow, you can submit questions through the Q&A button. If you're on a laptop or desktop, that's at the bottom of the menu. But if you're watching on mobile, you may find the Q&A button at the top of your screen. So please indicate in the Q&A who the question's for. Obviously, these ones will be for Katy. And then as you see questions there, you can upvote popular questions, which essentially will push to the top of the list, and our moderator in the panel session will try and get through as many, but we're rapidly running out of time. So so that's all from me, and I have pleasure in introducing Professor Katy Hayward, Queen's University, and she's going to be screen sharing her slides with us. So thank you, and over to you, Katy.
Thank you very much, Jane. Hello, everybody from sunny Belfast as well. As Jane said, I'm going to share some slides just to try and make sure that we get through quite a bit of information in 10 minutes. And I hope that this information will be useful to you, as useful as possible. It's presenting an overview of the movement of goods. There's much more in the protocol, much more relating to Brexit than that particular issue. But given the focus of this particular seminar today, that's what I'll concentrate on here in these 10 minutes. So what I really wanted to focus on is what we know. So as we've seen from Minister Coveney's talk, there's quite a lot that we don't know about and still to be decided. But essentially, we've got 43 working days until we hit that 1st of January deadline. GB then becomes a third country. There's immediate implementation of EU rules relating to customs for the movement of goods into GB and export of goods from GB. We do have a phased implementation period from GB in relation to goods moving into there, but from day one we will be requiring customs declarations, although they may be deferred from the GB side. For Northern Ireland, however, we have a very distinct situation. We have a bespoke deal arising from the protocol. Goods are still being made to EU standards. We will have free access to the single market, including Northern Ireland, including Ireland for goods. EU VAT rules will apply for goods. Still have access to the Vice scheme, for example. Where things will be different will be in relation to entry of goods from GB into NI. I'm going to try and explain all of this as simply and succinctly as possible. So goods moving from Northern Ireland. So as the Minister said, goods moving from Northern Ireland into Ireland, nothing changes, whether we have a deal UK-EU or not, nothing will change come the 1st of January, except for the fact that EOI numbers of NI businesses will have to have an XI prefix rather than a GB prefix. That should be sent to you automatically, or you can secure that through registering for the Trader Support Service, which I'll mention later. The thing that we still need to have a decision being made on, as the Minister mentions, is the question of whether goods produced in Northern Ireland will be considered to be of EU origin and therefore have access to EU FTAs. That is something that's being negotiated at the moment, but that's not something that is in the EU or the UK's gift to decide, if you like. That has to be negotiated with all those relevant countries. So I wouldn't expect to get a decision on that for some time yet. But in principle, goods moving from Northern Ireland into Ireland, nothing changes. Indeed, goods moving from Northern Ireland into the EU, nothing changes, except if they're going across Great Britain, where you will need to use transit. But essentially, Northern Ireland is continuing to be part of the single market for goods. Northern Ireland goods moving into GB, we have that commitment to unfettered access, which again is trying to ensure that there's as little change as possible for that. There are some limited exceptions, for example, in relation to trade of exotic species. There is something that is still being a bone of contention, if you like, between the UK and the EU, and that is whether exit summary declarations will be required. The UK, as we know, is hoping that they won't be and is strongly pushing for that. But that still has to be confirmed yet. Essentially, GB, the UK government is prioritising free flow of goods from NI into GB. And for the time being, the legislation that is put forward with regards to the movement of goods from NI into GB has meant that everything circulating in Northern Ireland that isn't under customs controls will have unfettered access into GB after the 1st of January. That will probably change over time, but on 1st of January and for the foreseeable future, that will be the case. Another question that has arisen is for all those goods that go from NI to GB via Ireland, so most notably via Dublin, this is something that we're yet to receive full clarity on. I think the safest assumption is that transit procedures will be needed in order to avoid customs procedures having to be followed on exiting Dublin going into Holyhead, for example. So full details on this is still to be released, but I think that's probably the most likely outcome. Now, for movements of goods from Ireland moving into Northern Ireland, again, nothing changes. We still have free access for goods. Don't be expecting any changes in that regard. What might affect that is whether we have a UK-EU deal that covers services. It's doubtful at the moment that it will, and that adds some complexity to that particular issue if you have movement of goods connected to the movement of services. But in principle, and as then essentially things remain as they are at the moment definitely for the movement of goods on the island of Ireland. Now, where we have the big changes in relation to movements of goods from Ireland into GB, that was a hard customs border now, if you like. So all the paperwork associated with the customs border will be required. What we don't know yet is whether tariffs will be paid. Now, if we have a UK-EU deal at all, at the bare minimum, to make it worthwhile, it will be zero tariffs, zero quotas. So if there's a deal, it means we won't be having tariffs on that movement, but nonetheless, we will still have to have those customs procedures being fulfilled from day one, from the 1st of January. From Ireland going to the EU via GB, unsurprisingly, the simplest way to do that will be to use transit procedures, the NCTS. And this will all need to be done before, obviously, getting on board the ferry. Going direct from Ireland to EU, of course, nothing changes in that regard. And then from Britain, GB into NI, this is the thing that is the biggest change for us on the island of Ireland, particularly in Northern Ireland. So essentially this is going to be a customs border. Import declarations will be required, safety and security declarations too. And there's still quite a bit to be determined in this. We know that those customs procedures will have to be fulfilled, but the extent of checks, whether tariffs will have to be paid, various derogations to facilitate the movement of goods, the flow of goods from GB into NI, all of that still has to be negotiated. There's quite a lot there. The key point of one important step to take is to sign up for the Trader Support Service, which is the first step towards enabling that movement and all those procedures to be followed as quickly as possible, as easily as possible. And then GB into Ireland, again, this is a customs border, so everything associated with that will need to be fulfilled. And the flip side to this as well is that goods moving from GB to NI via Ireland, again, and the best way of doing that is probably using transit to avoid those customs procedures. Okay, so that's a really quick run through to enable quite a lot of time for questions and answers. And I know Vincent's going to give you practical advice now, but I can't recommend strongly enough using Intertrade Ireland and the support and advice that it offers. And indeed, the team will be present after Vincent's talk to answer some questions too. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Katie, and we'll bring you back in later after we've heard from Vincent to contribute to the panel session. So really, I'll introduce very briefly the next speaker, which is Dr. Vincent Parr, who's no stranger to Intertrade Ireland or Brexit. He's presented many times, but his up-to-date advice and tips are always welcome. So Vincent is going to give us his views on 7 things which businesses need to do now, and probably within about less than 10 minutes, Vincent. So really over to you, and thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you very much indeed. And this was always the hardest slot, and it's got harder because it's got contracted. But the key point is that I've been asked to give you advice on making a journey to a destination that we haven't yet agreed, using a map that hasn't been published and passing road marks that haven't yet been agreed upon either. So look, don't get me wrong, it's a great honour to be asked to speak alongside the Minister, Aidan, Deirdre, Katy, everybody. It's a great honour. But I feel like a bald man who's just won a hairbrush in a competition. I'm not quite sure what to do with it, because it's very difficult to give you practical advice about a set of rules that haven't yet been there. And yet that's what we're doing ourselves as a business, with people in Belfast, in London and in Dublin, and also advising clients. We've actually got to the point now where Brexit has become so complicated that not one lawyer can answer all the questions. I answer some questions, colleagues then answer others. And rather than going into the detail and the nuances and the niceties of each little case, because we're finding different things in different sectors and different issues, I thought I'd step back and try and distill down the 7 things that really would make a difference. Some of them are high level, some of them are practical, but I think hopefully they'll be of use to you. The first thing I would say is accept the change. Acknowledge that there will be uncertainty in the future. And you heard the Minister say this as well, because the change being brought about by Brexit is enormous. No one under the age of 50 can remember what life was like before the United Kingdom acceded to the communities on the 1st of January 1973. The Minister himself, if he doesn't mind me saying so, was only 6 months old when the UK joined. And I'm sure he was monitoring developments and being briefed on it, but he would have no recollection. And if you think about it, the change is so fundamental that the people who are making the decisions at the European Council, if you think about President Macron of France, you think of Chancellor Wurz of Austria, you think of Prime Minister Frederiksen of Denmark, they weren't even born. It's also a change in direction, because trade agreements, whether it's the 1965 Anglo-Irish Trade Agreement, WTO or whatever, they're all about liberalizing trade. They're all about making it freer. This is about putting the genie back in the bottle, or partly back in the bottle as far as Northern Ireland is concerned, because of the protocol on Ireland and Northern Ireland. The cat flap that you have between Britain and Northern Ireland means that it's partly back in the bottle. And it's going to lead to uncertainty. and there's no point in denying that, this is now as certain as it gets. The past is only certain because we can look at it in a rear view mirror. And I think we just have to accept that as businesses. You know, you can't deny it or can't sort of wish it away. That's what the situation is. If you just think about how more complicated it could become, if, for example, Scotland were to, let's say, to vote to become independent and was to accede under Article 49 of the Treaty of the European Union to become a member of the European Union, and then you take a truck leaving Donegal, leaving the European Union, going into Northern Ireland, subject to the Protocol on Ireland and Northern Ireland, arriving in Scotland, i.e. back into the European Union, then going through into England, which at that stage might be subject to the Protocol on Scotland/England, and then into a third country, but with a special arrangement, and then back out again to France. This is about as difficult as, this is about as certain as it's going to become. So don't wish Brexit away. It's been there for 4.5 years. About 360 million babies have been born worldwide since it happened, and we just got to embrace it and get on with it. Secondly, review Brexit through the lens, or sorry, review your business through the lens of Brexit. Review your business tonight or over the weekend through the lens of Brexit. Ask yourself, first of all, which or all of any 1, 2, 3, or 4 of the 4 freedoms do we benefit from? The free movement of goods in terms of inputs, outputs, etc., raw materials, machinery, etc. The free movement of persons, the free movement of services, and free movement of capital and payments. Because those 4 things have made life easier for us up to now, and they're going to be reversed in part. So do think about the 4 freedoms that you're going to be affected by. Look at the standards that your business operates by, the technical standards that by which you make products and you sell products. Look at taxation, particularly indirect taxation, and above all else, think of your people. That's the really important thing. Do they need visas? Do they need qualifications? You heard the Minister making a very important point there. And the 11 strands of negotiation, one of them which is really important is, will people be recognised in their qualifications post-Brexit? There's a little bit in the legislation which is already there in the Parliament in Dublin, in the Oireachtas, that deals with that in certain areas, and more is needed. Thirdly, and if you don't listen to anything else I say, this bit is really important. Understand the changes. Google European Commission notice to stakeholders Brexit. European Commission notice to stakeholders Brexit. The European Commission has issued a really useful set of very detailed notices, which are very short, very simple to read, but they're very practical. Just looking at the sort of the first few alphabetically, they deal with things like animal breeding, animal transport, audiovisual services, chemicals, consumer protection, cosmetics, customs, detergents, fertilizers, food law, etc., etc. They're really, really useful. Now, the Department for the Economy in Northern Ireland has come up with a really helpful, a really clever checklist of stuff, you know, down to getting your economic operators registration and identification system number, your EORI, finding out the commodity codes for your goods. And you have to be clever about that. A simple example, I've used it before, but it's a very simple example. We had a case at one stage where somebody had a tracksuit, and that was one code, one tariff. But when you actually sold it as a sweatshirt and a jogging pants, there were 2 different codes, 2 different tariffs, and so on. So look through the detail, talk to customs agents, don't take the first thing you're told. Think about it. If you can't raise the Titanic, lower the Atlantic in these situations. Speak to your haulier, speak to the logistics people. You might say, oh, what I've got is very simple. It'll be a small package at the back of a truck. Yes, but it will move at the speed of the most complicated package on the back of that truck going through Holyhead, Calais, or wherever. Check the goods regulations, consider data. For example, we have to have an agreement with our Belfast office and our Dublin office for the passage of data. The whole area of data is really important. Think about immigration and settlements and so on. So understand the changes. The fourth thing, have a look at your contracts and arrangements. In particular, who's going to pay for any delay? Who's going to pay for all those things, which might be £25, €25, but they all mount up. So who's going to pay for those things? Who's going to deal with funding, with currency volatility, tariffs, and so forth? Look at the contracts, the unwritten ones as well as the written ones. The written ones may have provided for it, and then, as the Minister indeed said, trial run these things. Imagine that you're not trading with somewhere in the European Union, but you're trading with somewhere else in the world. How would it work? Fifthly, make the changes and make them quickly. If you need a subsidiary in the EU or the UK, get it done now. Everything is a bit slower in COVID, but with Christmas and everything else, it is going to be really limited time. So go and make those changes. Do you need licenses, authorizations? Do you need to think about currency volatility and so on? Regulatory arbitrage. Now is the time to go for those things. We were dealing with pharmaceutical companies in the run up to the first Brexit, if you will. This is full Brexit. The first Brexit, and the European Medicines Agency were saying, oh, we don't know, we'll be very, very busy coming up to this. They had no idea how busy they would become because of COVID. Penultimately, monitor and influence all sides of the debate. This is really important. Speak up. Nobody will protect your business more than you will. So, for example, the Minister for Foreign Affairs, he is championing and steering a very important piece of legislation through the Parliament, the Oireachtas at the moment. It's the withdrawal of the United Kingdom from the European Union Consequential Provisions Bill 2020. That's very useful because it's giving cast iron protection to certain sectors, to certain issues, and so on. Maybe your sector, maybe your business needs to be covered in that legislation. It's not too late. Try and influence that in this stage, at this stage. Also, in terms of things like state aid, that's really important because you don't want to be suffering from other businesses elsewhere in the European Union or in the United Kingdom benefiting enormously from state aid. We've never seen so much state aid. Since March, we've had over 3 trillion euros worth of state aid approved by the European Commission. And this could cause huge problems in the longer term, so be really careful about that. Finally, I would say adapt. Embrace the reality. The future is not the past. Embrace the opportunities. Some people are still wishing that Brexit won't happen. It is a reality. Perhaps the United Kingdom will come back. France rejoined NATO. The United States rejoined UNESCO. It's always possible. But for now, assume that it will happen and embrace the opportunities. The Minister put it very well earlier. It is an opportunity where it's part of one jurisdiction to deal with another, to embrace all the opportunities as they come. And the way I've thought about it was that if you think about Bangor, County Down, there are probably at least three Bangors in the world. There's Bangor, Maine, there's Bangor in North Wales, and there's Bangor, County Down. The choice with these negotiations was, would Bangor, County Down end up like Maine, i.e. a third country, or Britain with some advantages? It actually ended up with the best of all worlds, and that's the advantage and that's the beauty of Bangor, County Down. So I don't have all the answers. Had more time, I would have gone through much more detail that we could have done, but I think in the circumstances, they're the sort of the key messages. Just accept, understand, identify the issues for yourself, embrace the change and deal with it, and think about the stakeholders guidance and the Department for the Economy guidance. That's really useful, but the stakeholders guidance and those notices, that's where you should start, and you will probably find the answer to most questions in that area. So I hope that's been of some assistance. I know whistle stop tour, but hope it helped. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vincent. That's super. If I can ask you just to stay on camera,
Okay, sure.
stay on just as I bring the other panelists in. So for this session, I'd like to welcome Deirdre Maguire, who we haven't seen earlier this morning. She is manager of InterTradeIreland's Brexit Advisory Service. We have invited back Katy. Thank you, Katy. And this session will be moderated by Kerry Curran, who you see, and Kerry is the policy manager with InterTradeIreland. The instructions, I think everybody has been doing it quite effectively. Kerry, some time, you can decide how many of the live polls that you'd like us to run through. But for now, I'll really just hand over to Kerry to try and get through as many of those questions and give Deirdre some of her own questions. So thank you, and over to you, Kerry.
Thank you very much, Jane, and thank you very much to the panel as well for joining this Q&A session. As it's been mentioned today several times, we don't have all of the answers, so it's a very particularly difficult panel to be on, but I'm sure that Vincent, Katy and Deirdre will try and answer as many questions as we can today. I think this is a really good opportunity for firms that are on this webinar to have the opportunity to engage specialists and ask those questions. So I'm delighted to see so many questions coming through the Q&A function. Now, what I'd like to do in order to try and make sure that we get as many of those issues addressed during the short time that we have left is run a very quick poll with you just now about what your biggest Brexit concern is. That's poll 1, please, Jane. And if you can have a quick think about which of these areas will be most important for us to focus on during the time we have left. And I'm going to, while you're thinking on that and answering, I'm going to invite Deirdre Maguire to just really help us with that first question. So Deirdre has been working with businesses through the Brexit Advisory Service at InterTradeIreland. So what are businesses telling you at the moment is their biggest concern with just 8 weeks to go, Deirdre?
Hi Kerry, and hello to everybody on the panel, and thank you everybody for joining as well. So look, having been speaking to businesses quite a lot over the last number of, I suppose, a couple of years now, things have started to really increase in the last couple of months, and there's two things that are happening. The first thing is that there are businesses who've already planned and maybe they've been impacted by COVID and lots of disruption and are having a look at their Brexit plans again. And then there are the businesses who haven't prepared and are waiting to see if there's going to be a free trade agreement or for more information. So basically, for the businesses who are waiting and coming in with questions, the most common questions we're getting at the moment are on commodity codes. So Vincent, you referenced it yourself, commodity codes, what is my code? And to go down and drill into that level of detail for businesses is proven to be quite difficult for them. It's all about customs. What do I need to do with export health certificates, SPS checks? Where do I need to register? And it's all about the flow of trades, where the goods and the supply chains interact with GB. There's questions coming in on GDPR, on, you know, what do I need to do if I transfer data? And there will be questions, a lot coming in on VAT. And then finally as well, there'll be questions that we expect to see and that aren't coming in. So I think that's probably one thing I would be a bit concerned about. And it's been referenced today, I suppose, terms of trade, who pays the duty, all of those things. And they're questions that businesses should be asking themselves now. Who is going to pay the duty? Who owns the risk for the transfer of goods? And just because Northern Ireland and a cross-border trader in Ireland, the Northern Ireland Protocol will provide a really good opportunity with unfettered access, but there is a heavily integrated supply chain and lots of goods go into GB, come back into Northern, go into Ireland, and they move around. It's unbelievable what the stories we hear. So I would say, you know, that's the kind of things that I'm hearing. Some of the things I'm not hearing are the Incoterms. But I understand that it is overwhelming for businesses. The amount of information at the minute is just, it's really, really difficult, and there are many layers to it. So, you know, there is support. It's been mentioned, there's lots of support there, Kerry.
Well, that's actually probably a lot of the businesses on the call today will be very interested in that, in terms of now with say just a few months to go, where do they go to for support? What support's available to them?
Yeah, so there are lots of ways to look at support, okay? And the first thing I'd say is, and the Minister mentioned it as well, so the state bodies, so you've got InterTradeIreland, and I will tell you a little bit about what exactly their support is, and our support with the Brexit Advisory Service. But just quite briefly, you have the local enterprise offices, and you have Enterprise Ireland. You have things like the NI Business Info, which has the checklist Vincent mentioned. You have an EU readiness checker that Invest in I have. You've got your local councils who are all doing things, and your enterprise centres. And you would be surprised how much support is actually out there. And then we've got InterTrade Ireland. So we have been working really hard with cross-border traders to help them get through their questions and help them identify their risks. And one of the things that we have is a fully funded voucher support. So that's £2,000 or €2,250, and that will give you your business access to, it's a fully funded consultancy, and it can cover things like if you wanted to have a look and map your trade flows, have a look at your supply chain, you know, get somebody in to have a look and find out what your commodity codes are. It might be getting trained in customs, it might be mapping your data, and that voucher will help you do all of those things. It will help you have a look at your financial issues like currencies, hedging, or even have a look if you wanted to open up and have a look at a subsidiary in the opposite jurisdiction. It covers all of those things. So that's just one tangible thing that if you haven't done now as a business, you can do. If you just key in InterTrade Ireland /Brexit, Brexit InterTrade Ireland, you'll find the link to the funding page. The other things that we have lots of digital content. Again, that's continually being built on, and over the weeks and months ahead, the key information, like if there's going to be updates on VAT or any new negotiations in trade and goods, trade and services, we'll add to all of that. And again, you can access that through InterTrade Ireland ~Brexit on the website. It'll take you through there. The other thing I would say as well is in terms of supports out there, the people in your business, attend webinars, learn as much as you can. You know, a tangible task that you do every day will be absolutely worth it. And Katie also mentioned the Trader Support Service. If you are based in Northern Ireland, I would recommend that you register for that. And then also there's lots of things, lots of information. Depending on the kind of products you have, you may need to register for licenses. If you're going to be importing goods or exporting goods that interact with GB, SPS checks will become a part of your day. So you will have tasks in almost each level, but I would say take it in a piece by piece, take the layers and just start at one thing at a time and go through it, and come to InterTrade Ireland if you've got something difficult and you're really worried about it. If we don't have the answer today, we'll certainly seek to get it for you and use supports.
Great, thank you very much, Deirdre. So essentially everyone, all of the firms that are on this call today, we do have more than 500 firms registered for this event. You aren't alone, there is plenty of support out there. Now I'm just looking at the poll results from that quick poll that you did for us a moment ago, and we're seeing almost 50% of the firms that are on the call today have identified customs procedures as their biggest concern, and that's not surprising given the different flows of goods that operate across the island, followed closely there by supply chain links. Services access and data transfers, interestingly, not as high up the agenda perhaps as we might have expected, given the potential implications of those. But I'd like to ask Katy, just given your presentation, Katy, on the flow of goods north, south, east, west, we have a few questions coming in on customs and where those customs procedures will lie. So just to try and bundle those together to try and give us the chance to have as many questions answered as possible, just for absolute clarity, a few points. Will there be any customs paperwork flowing on the island of Ireland, north, south, south, north?
No is the answer to that.
So, and I think that's really important that people have that clarity, because we talk about sort of like a frictionless border, and from the questions that are coming in on the Q&A function, I think people are wondering whether or not there's paperwork sitting back from the border, which had been part of earlier discussions around Brexit. But the answer is very clearly no. On the island of Ireland, there will not be any paperwork. We're also seeing civic questions with regard to the movement of goods from GB into Ireland. So from GB into Ireland in the south, GB into Northern Ireland, and then on to Ireland. Can you just essentially recap on what you were saying to us earlier about where those customs posts will lie?
Yeah, so we will have new customs posts in Northern Ireland for dealing with goods coming from GB. And I would really encourage people to use the services available through yourselves, and also to look on the revenue.ie website for Brexit. There's very detailed information there about accessing, about the customs requirements for importing goods from GB or exporting to GB or across GB. And that information is very clearly set out. And similarly, for GB into NI, we do know the basics. So we've got advice from the government on the gov.uk website called Moving Goods Under the NI Protocol. And it's got the essentials there in terms of giving some examples of what will be needed for goods moving from GB to NI. But essentially, as I say, it'll be treated as if it was a customs border, so exporting from GB into EU, with some differences, but it's important not to sort of downplay the significance of that. That said, come the 1st of January, the emphasis on all sides is making the protocol work. I'll just mention the UK Internal Market Bill because it's come up a little bit in the questions. There's a lot of obviously a lot of concern around the politics of it all, but I would stress that from both sides we're coming close to a deal, both in relation to agreement on the protocol and in relation to a free trade agreement. And sorry if you can hear the snoring, that's my dog who's gripped by all of this. But essentially, there's a lot of politics around all of that, but primarily nobody's going to do anything to kind of disrupt the working of the protocol in a way that will be of most benefit to Northern Ireland, I think. So there's a lot of common ground there, and we can be hopeful that in implementing the protocol it will be done in a way that's not detrimental to Northern Ireland's interests in the longer term.
Thanks very much, Katie. And staying on this theme, because customs is very much the biggest issue that people are raising with us today, we do have a question in from Declan Byrne. And I suspect I know the answer to this one. Is there a scenario where Northern Ireland can be used as a staging post for the import of goods from the UK in order to avoid custom requirements if they're going to be sent south to Ireland?
Yeah, so this is that question about goods at risk. So if there is a UK-EU deal, it really diminishes the significance of that at-risk category. So that's essentially the question of can basically Northern Ireland become a backdoor into the EU, and if the incentive for doing that is to avoid tariffs that GB goods would otherwise get if they're going to the EU directly. Now, because there won't be the tariffs if we have the deal, that question dramatically decreases, not completely because you have third country goods, but it's dramatically dealt with. If we don't have a deal, there is still aspects of the protocol or scope for the protocol to find room for the UK and the EU to agree on what goods would be categorized as being at risk. And again, they would, I think the intention would be to make that as efficient as possible. But I think that's basically the EU has to make sure, as we heard from the Minister, that there wouldn't be worries about the protocol being used to sort of undermine the single market. That's a real priority. But at the same time, nobody's looking to have a complete, obviously, shutdown of entry of goods into Northern Ireland from GB come 1st of January. So even if there is no deal, there will be arrangements made to make sure that that this won't cause huge friction on trade of goods coming in from GB into NI. But longer term, the intention is to avoid such a situation whereby NI could be that backdoor. Similarly, the other way around as well, although as I stressed, come the 1st of January, the intention is to keep the movement of goods going as unfettered as possible from NI into GB. There will be anti-avoidance regimes being put in place on the UK side to stop a situation in which NI could be used as a backdoor into GB from the rest of Europe. So this is that sort of balance that we have in Northern Ireland, is given a very distinct position, which gives advantages, but it does mean there will be changes come the 1st of January, and indeed over the coming months. And that possibly is an important message to get across, that there's still quite a bit to be decided, and there's also negotiations and changes that will continue to take place into 2021. There will be secondary legislation that will affect the movement of goods. So this isn't just a sort of, if you get it done in 43 days and you're ready for the 1st of January, that's it. Actually, it's something that we're going to have to continue to just have as part of our day-to-day functioning as businesses trading across the Irish Sea.
Yeah, that's it. I think it'll be a learning curve going much beyond the 1st of January for all of us, I'm sure. Staying on customs, if you don't mind, Katie, we actually have quite a few questions coming in from firms, both in Ireland and Northern Ireland, who clearly import goods from the rest of the world via GB. So they're coming in from the rest of the world to GB and then crossing the Irish Sea into either Ireland or Northern Ireland. And the question is really about sort of like when and where those any tariffs would apply. And I assume that depends on the transit procedures that have been put in place for those goods, and also whether it's going into Ireland or Northern Ireland. Do you have any thoughts on that one?
Yeah, so it is very complicated. I mean, essentially, rest of world goods, let me think about coming directly into Northern Ireland, say, we will have the UK tariffs being applied unless it's a situation where the EU thinks that there might be a risk of those goods going into the rest of the EU, in which case EU tariffs will be applied, and then they can be reclaimed if it's proven that they're staying in Northern Ireland. For goods coming into Northern Ireland from the rest of the world via GB, then that's simple enough, because it would be the UK tariffs that would be applied, and those are the ones that are meant to be applied for goods coming into Northern Ireland, because Northern Ireland is still in the UK's customs territory, and it would just have to be proven that they are staying in Northern Ireland rather than going on to the EU. For goods coming into GB from the rest of the world that are going into the Republic of Ireland, it's a bit different altogether, because of course it's the EU tariffs that will be needing to be applied rather than GB ones, and that's where I'd advise people to get professional advice on that. Maybe Vincent can help.
No, that's fantastic, actually, Katie. That's been really helpful. Thank you. I'm actually going to give you a break from your customs questions, because it does really actually emphasize for hopefully all of the people on the webinar today just the importance of mapping our supply chains to understand where our goods were coming from, so then we can actually identify those risks and exposures and take the time over these next few months to address those and mitigate where we can. So we've also had a few questions coming in on the Q&A with regard to planning for Brexit, and Deirdre, I'm going to turn to you, if I may, with regard to the planning issue and really how we prepare over these next 2 months. And there's been a good question in from John McLaughlin with regard to whether we should really be planning for a no deal and take that as our worst case scenario and as a starting point for our planning process. What are your thoughts on that?
I think for businesses, I think, and Vincent, you captured it very correctly at the beginning when you said accept. I think you need to accept it's happening, and it's actually going to be a bit of work. Okay, so even though this is not what you want as a business, and COVID is here, you've got all of these things coming at you, Brexit too, there will be work, deal or no deal. So I think if I was suggesting to give you a piece of advice about planning, I would say there are things that you can do that will be relevant whether there is an agreement or whether there isn't an agreement. Okay, and I would start there. So I would look at it and try and take away all of the noise, everything that you hear that may not be relevant to your business. Think of your own business, okay, and think about if you're trading in goods or if you're trading in services, okay? Think about who you buy to, who you sell from, and then the questions that you ask yourself, you need to ask your suppliers, okay? So things that you can do now that will be relevant, whether there is an agreement or whether there isn't an agreement, are commodity codes for your goods, okay? Your terms of trade, who pays the duty, That's called Incoterms. So identify what your Incoterms are. Register for support if you haven't done it already. And, you know, if you've made plans, go back in and look at them. And then I would say, so map your supply chains. Kerry, you mentioned it there now, but map your data. So know if you send data out of your business, where it goes and who it goes to. And if you really wanted to plan for a no deal, no free trade agreement, there are things you can do. For example, that might be like putting international clauses into your contracts. But for every piece of planning, there is a detail. And so to strip it back, start trading goods, look at your customs requirements, look at your labeling. If you've got organic products, have you chemical products, and then look at any services you provide across the border. Identify your risk. It's the first and the best thing you can do. And commodity codes, terms of trade, and map your supply chain and map your data.
Great, thank you, Deirdre. That's really helpful. And while we have you actually on screen, we also have had a few questions in about SPS checks. Alan Dorman asks whether vet health certificates will be required on goods moving, just goods here on the island of Ireland, moving north-south, south-north. Hopefully that's the one to answer.
Yeah. Well, so the cross-border trader will have unfettered access, so there won't be any, okay? Yes. So that is one comfort that a business can take. So if there's no interaction with GB trade in your supply chain of any way, then you won't be implicated. But I would strongly advise you to have a look at your supply chains and map and see where your good is produced in and where it finishes to, and then whoever you sell your good to across the border, where they sell it to, because your demand for your product will also be important on your profit margins. So that's so there's almost like a little domino effect. Cross-border, SPS, no. But I would say if you are worried or anxious at all and think that this is any way going to touch in your business, I would go to the government's websites and both, I would go DERA and DAFAM, so the Ireland government, the Northern Ireland government, and both of those sites will give you very clear instructions what you need to do. You will need to register. There are things like traces is one, and IPAFs, I know there's a name for them, on the other. So you need to register. If you're in Northern Ireland, definitely register for the Trader Support Service. And then if you're in Ireland, I would say register for traces. But so take the actions, go into the government websites, and that's what InterTradeIreland's here to do. We can help you, we can signpost you and get you into the right place to get you started. It will change for businesses, but for cross-border traders with no GP trade, it should be okay.
Thanks very much for that, Deirdre. I'm not sure if Vincent can hear us. Can you hear us, Vincent? I think
absolutely. Yep. No, I'm here.
Super. I wasn't sure if you were still with us there. Now I know it's not a top question that came up on our poll, but it's came through a number of times on our Q&A session with regard to the VAT rules in the south, and I'm hoping you can answer this, perhaps even on the.
Not my area.
It's actually whether or not there'll be deferred VAT rules applying from GB to Ireland. I know there has been some discussion on whether VAT on goods moving from GB into Ireland will be deferred from the 1st of January. I was wondering if yourself or perhaps any of the other panel members have heard whether this is likely to be confirmed soon.
Go ahead.
I don't know, Vincent, if you have or not, but I'm happy
go
to
ahead.
take.
Sorry.
Deirdre, do you want to go ahead,
Yeah,
Deirdre?
sorry, no, you go ahead. You go ahead, Deirdre. Yep.
A question that's asked quite a lot. It's been asked nearly every day for the last couple of weeks by businesses, and my understanding, Vincent, unless you know something different, is that has not yet been agreed. So the trade flows. So the trade flows for VAT, again, it's GB into Northern Ireland and it's Ireland into GB. Obviously Northern Ireland will align to the European Union VAT rules, but it will be part of the UK's VAT system. What I would say, and if a business was asking that question to the InterTradeIreland service team, we would be saying to you, there are two places to go to. One is the revenue site, and there's very clear guidelines on what to do post the transition on VAT. And the other one is the UK Gov /transition, UK Gov transition VAT. And again, that gives you as a business very clear guidance what to do post-transition. Vincent, you probably know more about me than that, but that's where I would start. I would start on those places.
Yeah, and hopefully that'll be a great start.
I would agree entirely with sorry, Kerry, I'd agree entirely with Deirdre on that. And sorry, go ahead.
No, that's great. I'm just conscious of time, so I just want to try and get in another sort of like quick question in and around services, because there's been a few people that have come in with some very specific services questions, which I don't think we'll have time to get to today. But because, Katy, the Northern Ireland Protocol doesn't apply to services, what would you say to firms that are moving services across the border, particularly those who are reliant on data movement across the border? Because again, we have a few questions in on that.
Yeah, so that's a really complicated one. I stand to be corrected on this, but essentially the UK has said for its part is happy for data to be moved from the UK to the EU. So that include, say, north to south. But what we don't know is whether there will be an adequacy assessment from the EU side saying that it's okay, if there's no bigger agreement on this, for data to be moved from the EU to the UK. And so data transfer mechanisms will have to be arranged in the absence of that on a sort of case-by-case basis. And I would imagine that we won't get clear, like, I don't think, I'd be surprised if this is included in an agreement this side of Christmas. It'll probably be one of those things that will be negotiated or decided some way hence. Is that enough on the data?
No, that's really helpful. Thank you, Katy. And actually, I'll draw you close there, just unconscious of the time. What I would add on that is that there are processes for businesses now to prepare for no negotiation around data in terms of adding in sort of like special contractual clauses into their current contracts. So it is an area that businesses will need to look at, particularly because services aren't included in the Northern Ireland Protocol. But as we are actually quite a bit over time, with it being 20 to 2, I'll have to actually just draw us to a close here and say thank you so much to all of our panel members, but also to all of you on the call today and on the webinar for feeding in so many really useful questions. For those that we haven't been able to get to, or that were perhaps too specific for the overall panel discussion today, I assure you that the team at InterTradeIreland will be taking those and responding to you in the next day or two. So it's very much appreciated the engagement that you've given us through the Q&A and chat sessions, and through the polls as well. So without further ado, given the time, I'd just like to take this opportunity to pass back to Aidan Goff, who's going to make some closing remarks for today. And thank you all.
Thanks, Kerry. I just want to very quickly, just to wrap up, to thank Minister Simon Coveney and our speakers, Dr Katy Hayward from Queen's and Vincent Parr from A&L Goodbody, as well as our own business and Brexit policy experts, Deirdre and Kerry. This was the first session in what is really aimed at a series of webinars. This first session was designed to just really get us a feeling, bring us up to date of just where Brexit is at the minute. As you see, we very quickly delved into some very complex issues. These will be addressed in further webinars. The next one that we're scheduling will take place in the first week of December, and it will really get into the details behind managing all island supply chain resilience, rules of origin, eco-terms, and other complex issues like that. So once again, I just want to thank all our speakers and thank everybody for participating, and good afternoon.